everyone? Welcome to the OklaRoots YouTube channel. In today's tutorial, we're gonna be making an adorable little bag. It's like a backpack, it's a handbag, it's kind of a tote bag. It is an adorable, very unique bag from Sallie Tomato. Today, we are making the Sloane bag, and this is a pattern from Sallie Tomato Patterns. It's also the monthly mystery box for the month of June for the OklaRoots Sallie Tomato monthly mystery box. So as soon as I saw this pattern come out, I knew I wanted to make it. It is so stinking cute. Let's just run through everything. It's so cute. Just wait till you see this. This is a really fun one, guys. So we have a front bottom panel and a front top panel. Separating these two panels is a little secret zipper. So you open that up, nice big exterior zip pocket, perfect for your phone, for your ID, just things you need quick access to. On the back, it's actually a backpack, and it's such a unique way to do a backpack. You see we have the adjustable straps here on the sides, and then it actually goes through a loop in the top handle to create the backpack look, which is so cool. We don't have other hardware up here or anything like that. Then we have two small handbag handles, and on the top we do have a recessed zipper. So when we open that up, you can see the zipper is nice and long. You can poke it out if you'd like, so you can have the zipper hanging out like this to get a nice big wide open, or you can tuck the zipper tail down inside the bag so it's a little bit more hidden. Then on the inside we have a nice clean lining, and we have one slip pocket. This pattern has a lot of techniques that you're going to learn. It might be the first time you're doing a recessed zipper. Maybe it's the first time you're doing a backpack strap like this. I know this was the first time I did something like this. We are modifying it a little bit if you are using the box, because in the pattern, the strap suggestion is a 1-inch wide webbing, but in the box, we're using a 1.5-inch wide webbing, which means we need to be a little bit more careful with how we stitch these straps up here, but I'm gonna walk you through all of that today. So as always, thank you so much to Sallie Tomato for not only letting me use your amazing patterns on the OklaRoots YouTube channel, but for also partnering with me for this monthly box. This is such a fun way to explore different patterns, sewing with different materials. You can see here we have a quilt cotton, we have a canvas, we have some cork, we have foam inside of here. So there's a lot of different techniques you're gonna learn here that maybe you haven't done before, and this is a great way to just practice that. To practice, do I like working with cork? Do I like working with canvas? How do I feel about boxing this bottom down here? This is a great way to just kind of dip your toes into patterns, materials, things you might otherwise not try. And then, if you fall in love with it, you go use your own material and make a whole bunch of these. So speaking of that, I always like to test out a pattern with my own material before I use the box material. And so you can see I have the zipper hanging out on this one. But this is a beautiful tulip pink fabric. I love these little hippos. They're so cute. And I use like a little anchor pull. And then I just use quilt cotton on the top accent right here. But once again, went with cork. And you can see here on the back, so cute. And then for this one, I actually did use the water resistant canvas for the lining, which is also perfectly doable. So if you're worried about thick seams or anything like that, we are going to be talking a lot about how to keep those seams nice and thin to make this a doable pattern for every sewing machine. Tucking in this little zipper end over here. But you don't have to use thick material. Again, just some cork, quilt cotton, nothing fancy. But if you want the lining to be a little bit more durable, rather than using quilt cotton, you can use the water resistant canvas, and it works perfectly. So if you're new to the OklaRoots YouTube channel, please consider clicking subscribe down below. If at any point you like this video, please give it a like. Any questions, comments, anything at all, leave them down in the comments section. If there's another Sallie Tomato pattern you want to see on the channel, let me know. I love Sallie Tomato patterns, and I don't know how they come out. They have like a magic machine or something, because they're coming out with new patterns. It seems like a few of them every month. I cannot keep up. I'm always just like, but I had a list over here of patterns I wanted to do, and now you've done the new ones, and I want those too. So if you see one of their patterns you really want to see featured, just leave it down in the comment section below, and we'll try to bump it up to the top of the list. Okay, so I'm going to show you this backpack on real quick. I always pick the wrong shirt for backpack videos. This is a very flowy shirt. It's probably not meant to be worn with a backpack, but I am determined to show you how stinking cute this is, so just bear with me for a moment, okay? Okay, so here's the backpack from the front. I love these straps. These straps are so pretty. And then here's the backpack from the back. You can see it just fits so nicely. It's a really nice shape too. It's not too big, it's not too small, but it's a little bit wider, which I really like. Alrighty guys, let's get started. So for this pattern, you're going to need a 30 yard of main fabric. Now this can be whatever you want it to be. Today we're using quilt cotton, but if you are much more comfortable working with thicker material, it can be a canvas, it could be a vinyl, it could be a faux leather. You can have it be anything you want. To keep it easy, we are going to be working with lightweight material today. Then you're going to need about 1/8 of a yard of accent fabric. This should be something like cork, faux leather, something like that. Something that can take a beating and can have raw edges, because we are using it for the straps, and the straps do have raw edges. We're also going to be using it for the base. Then we have a small cut, again, about 1/8 of a yard of contrast fabric. This is just for that front top panel. That's it. This is the only place you put it. Now, if you want to add this in other places and on like the lining and the pockets and stuff like that, that would be a really cool way to tie it all in together. But today we're just going to use it for one piece of material. And then you'll want about 5/8 of a yard of lining material. This is what you're going to need the most of. Again, we're using quilt cotton for this, but you can use water resistant canvas. You can use whatever you'd like. Now, when it comes to interfacing and stabilizer, how much you're going to need really depends on how much you want to use. So, for example, with the woven interfacing, we're only using it on a couple of very small pieces today. We're not using a lot of it. Most of our quilt cotton will be left not interfaced, which is great if you have like a domestic sewing machine that really does not like thick layers. So remember, the more stuff you add to your material, the thicker the seams are going to be and the harder it's going to be to sew. So if you're not really sure about your machine and how it's going to handle thicker layers, my advice is stick with the pattern. Don't add any interfacing where it doesn't tell you to. So I'm going to be sticking with the pattern today, only adding it to a couple spots, which I'll show you when we go through the pattern pieces. So per the pattern, you need about 1/4 yard of woven interfacing, even less than that, honestly. But it's always good to have more than what you think you need. Next, we have some sew and foam interfacing. You're going to need about 1/3 to 2/3 of a yard. It depends how wide it is. Check the pattern for that. You could also use fusible fleece if you'd like. This foam is what's going to be making the structure of the bag really nice. So because we're not using a thick material, we need something to hold the structure of the bag, right? And so this foam is going to do that for us. So it's really nice to use foam with quilt cotton. Besides the fact that you can quilt it and give it a really cool look, it just provides structure where the material you're using doesn't. Next up, we have our webbing. Now the pattern does suggest 1-inch webbing, and I will tell you that because we're using a wider webbing in the kit, we're using a 1.5-inch wide webbing, we are going to have to make some adjustments in the pattern. So if you don't want to have to do that, if you want to just stick to the pattern, keep everything as is, then use 1-inch webbing. But whatever size webbing you're using, you need to make sure the hardware goes with it. So because we're using 1.5-inch webbing, we need 2 1.5-inch sliders and 2 1.5-inch rectangle rings. If this is a 1-inch webbing, same thing over here, these will be 1-inch hardwares. Next, you're gonna need 2 zippers, a 12-inch and a 16-inch or longer zipper. I have one piece of zipper tape here that I will cut down for that, and then you're gonna need 2 zipper pulls to go with it. All right, here's a bunch of the other stuff. Lots and lots of clips, obviously, lots of clips. The thread I'm gonna be using today is a Tex 45 weight thread. It is pretty thick, especially for quilt cotton, so I do suggest maybe just using a Gutermann thread, maybe using a Tex 35 weight, but this will work. And so my top thread will be the Tex 45 weight. The bobbin thread will be a Gutermann thread. I just get this from Joann's. I just suggest that whatever thread you use when you're making a bag, make sure it's polyester. I would stay away from cotton thread with bags. Next, my needle is a Microtex 8012 needle. Since I'm not using a lot of thick material today, I don't need a thick needle. If you're loading up on the vinyl, the faux leather, and all that good stuff, then maybe up it to a 9014. I have my bag tag, which is not included in the box or anything. It's just something I like to put on my bags. I have some double-sided tape, which is going to be especially helpful with zippers and also with the handles. I have a stiletto, which is just like my third hand that I keep at the sewing machine with me, a stiletto seam ripper combo, and then I have my turning tool to help poke out any little corners, usually for the lining pockets. I'll be using a chalk marking pencil and also an air erasing marking pencil, a 1-inch by 6-inch ruler as always, a lighter to clean up any loose threads, and especially this is important with the webbing. I have some tape because there are going to be quite a few pieces today that we just have to kind of tape in place and then take it over to the machine. I have this small thread here. Now I'm not using the thread, but I'm going to be using the spool. And because you need something small like this, maybe like a penny even, you just need something small and round to help you build your straps. I'm going to show you how I do that once we get to that step. And then completely optional, but it is a nice accent, we have rivets. Rivets are great for the handles. They're also really great for the backpack strap if you don't feel comfortable sewing the webbing. So I will have rivets. I don't know if I'll use them in the tutorial, but I'll tell you where to use them if you want to. All right, so let's go through the pattern pieces. Pattern piece A, you're gonna have 1 cut of exterior. This is my quilt cotton, no interfacing on it. And then 2 cuts of your lining. Again, quilt cotton, no interfacing. You're also gonna have 2 cuts of foam. These are all from pattern piece A. I know it feels a little weird to be working with this stuff without the woven interfacing. However, we do have quite a few seams here that can get bulky. If you're used to that, Go ahead and add your woven interfacing to all these pieces if you'd like. However, the foam is going to add enough structure for us today. Next, we have pattern pieces B and C. Pattern piece B is the front bottom part of the bag, and pattern piece C is going to be the zipper facing, which is going to help us attach the zipper right here. Now, pattern piece C does have woven interfacing on it, and it is completely interfaced from all corners. Next up, we have pattern pieces D, E, and F. Pattern piece D is the front top. So this is fun to kind of switch it up. I wanted to go with a solid because we have a lot of big prints on the outside of this bag. So this solid I thought would just kind of bring it in, but you could make it another print if you'd like. I'm using a canvas material. It doesn't have to be a thicker material. It can be quill cotton, that's fine. I don't have it interfaced with anything. Next we have pattern piece E, which is going to be the base of the bag. This is where you want that more sturdy material because it's the bottom of the bag. It's what touches the table, the floor, wherever you put your bag, you know what I mean? So I'm going to be using the cork for that. And then I also have a cut of a lining, no interfacing, and then I also have a cut of the foam. And pattern piece F are the handles. You're gonna have 4 cuts of this. These are just thin rectangles. If you wanna use edge coating or anything like that, I highly suggest it because these handles will have raw edges. I'll have a link down below for my favorite place to get the edge coating, but you can definitely have some fun with that. I'm not gonna be showing you how to do that today because it is a little bit more of an advanced skill set and one I'm not completely comfortable with, but you could definitely do it. Next up, we have pattern pieces G and H. Pattern piece G is your interior slip pocket, just 1 cut of lining material, no interfacing. And then pattern piece H are 4 cuts of small rectangles for your recessed zipper. These do have interfacing, and you'll see the interfacing. I don't know if you can see, it's white on white over here. The interfacing is smaller than the cut piece, so make sure you pay attention to that. Don't just slop on the interfacing here. The interfacing pieces are smaller. They don't extend all the way to any of the edges, so make sure you just center those on all 4 pieces of your pattern piece H's. Then we have pattern pieces I and J. Pattern piece I is zipper pocket A and pattern piece J is zipper pocket B. Both of these are 1 cuts of material. You'll notice we have a lot of rectangles today that are not that different in size, so that's why I do suggest you mark them. They all have pattern piece labels like I, J, so mark them in some way to keep it straight or else you'll be measuring them a lot when you get to them. And finally, we have pattern piece K, which is a zipper fabric tab. If you have a piece of hardware, like a little metal piece that goes over the end of the zipper, definitely use that. I'm just gonna quickly show you what that looks like. So we'll be building our own little zipper end here, but this is what the piece of hardware looks like. And you see, all you have to do is just fold down the edges of your zipper like that. Insert this over the teeth like that. You'll have a tiny screw. Screw in the little screw, and there you go. Very, very simple. Building a fabric tab is not difficult, but it does take more work than that. So if this is something you're interested in, definitely go look for these. They're very, very easy to use. So let's get started with this front panel. Grab pattern pieces B and C. What we want to do first is find the midpoint along the top edge of pattern piece B and also along the inner top edge. So this is how it looks like this with little nubs going up. We want to find the midpoint along this edge as well. Now, using those 2 midpoint marks, you want to center your pattern piece C right side down on pattern piece B, so they're right sides together. Now, this can get a little tricky. First things first, the top little nubs here need to line up with the raw edge, and then the midpoint needs to line up with the midpoint on your pattern piece B. This is where a ruler comes in handy just to kind of help you line it up. Once you have that lined up, you can clip the top corners here. If you're worried about it moving around too much on you, you can grab your tape and just tape it along a couple edges. We're going to be sewing along this top inner edge here, so you can tape along the outer edge. So now we're going to go to the sewing machine and we're going to sew along the inner bit here. So the left side, the top of this pattern piece C, and then the right side over here. We're going to sew along all those edges at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Make sure you backstitch at the beginning and the end. Once you have this sewn down, then what we want to do is we want to cut this inner rectangle out. And we're going to cut this seam allowance down to 1/8 of an inch. So I'm pretty much just going to take my scissors and I'm going to cut right in the middle between the stitching and the edge of that panel C. And I'm just going to do that along the entire top bit here, the little edges here and then the long edge. And then at these corners over here, I'm going to cut a little diagonal from the corner right to the thread without cutting the stitches. This is just going to help these corners spread out. So it's just a teeny tiny snip as close as I can get to the thread without actually cutting it. So next we want to grab our iron And we're gonna flip these pieces wrong sides together. So I like to do this in sections. So I'm gonna flip this over, looking at the back of pattern piece B. Then I'm gonna slowly flip over pattern piece C, starting on the short edge here, and just rotate it wrong sides together. And then just work on this one corner right here first. So get this one corner lined up and as straight as possible first, and then press it. And the trick is to do this in sections. Don't try to do it all at once. So once I am done, I'm gonna let that cool for just a moment. And now I'm gonna go along the straight edge here, just folding it back, rolling the seam so it's nice and flat. And then again, just pressing it in sections. All right, once you have the whole section pressed, you can flip it over and then just give it a gentle press from the front as well. And the nice thing about using the same material for both of these pattern pieces is that if one edge is kind of rolled up, peeking through, you're not gonna notice it. All right, set this to the side for just a moment. So now grab pattern piece I, which is a lining piece, and then grab your shorter zipper, your 12-inch zipper. And grab a lighter, and let's just melt down the edges of this zipper tape. So this zipper tape, these look like metal teeth. They are not. They're plastic teeth that we can cut, sew over, do whatever we want to. And then the material of the zipper tape too, the threads that make the tape part, is also made of plastic. So you can easily melt it, and it seals in that plastic so you don't have to worry about it fraying. So take pattern piece I and lay it right side up so that the long edge is along the top like that. And then grab your zipper. And when the zipper is closed, it should be going towards the right. Lay your zipper right side up, right along the top edge of pattern piece I. You can grab some clips and just clip these together. And now let's sew along this top clipped edge at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Once you have this sewn on, you're going to press piece I away from the zipper. And we're going to make sure the zipper stays flat, so we're not bending the zipper tape at all. You can look at this from the right side of the lining. And again, the zipper is flat. We're not bending that seam. We're bending the material, not the zipper. And then just press along the seam up here. So now lay your zipper right side up, and it should be the back of your lining panel, just like this. And when the zipper closes, it should now be going towards the left. Grab your pattern piece B that already has the facing on it, and we're going to just lay this right over the zipper just like that. So when doing this, flip up the sides of pattern piece B and line up the corners of these little facing bits here with the corner of the pocket. So that's how it should all line up. So that way you don't have to worry so much about centering everything. So what I do is I just flip up these sides first, looking at these little corners here and matching them up with the top corners of my lining piece and clip those together. Now make sure the zipper is up and away. Now what I want to do is I'm going to take pattern piece B and just flip it up like this. So I'm looking at the bottom edge of my zipper tape, and I'm going to grab some double-sided tape and just run it right along the bottom underneath the stitching. So I'm not having the tape go above the stitching. And then gently flip pattern piece B back down. And we're going to carefully, again, making sure the top edge is lined up with the top edge of the zipper tape. We're going to pull up this bottom folded edge. Try to make sure it covers the stitching. I find it gets a little close to it, but do your best to keep it straight and covering the stitching. And this just takes a little bit of finagling. Luckily, this tape is not super sticky, so if you need to lift up your material and move it around, you can. There we go. Once you find that it looks straight, the sides are good, and you're covering the stitching you already put on that zipper tape, now we can take this back to the sewing machine, and on the inner edge, just like we originally sewed B and C together, we're going to top stitch at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. So over here on the left side, along this top edge here, and then over here on the right side, 1/8 of an inch seam allowance all the way around. So once you have this stitched on, so we just have the zipper and that one piece of lining, now grab pattern piece J, which is another lining cut, and we're going to lay this one right side up, just like that. And then we're going to take our B unit, we're going to lay it right side up over on top of it. So now our two lining pieces are right sides together, and line up pattern piece J along the sides with the zipper and lining. So again, I always like to start at the corners. So I'm looking at these two top corners here. And I'm moving pattern piece B out of the way just so I can see what's going on better. And then just clip it along this top edge here. Okay, now we're going to go to the sewing machine, and we're only going to sew along the zipper tape that you can see. Okay, that's it. Not all the way along the edge, just the zipper tape where you can see it. we're going to sew at under a 1/4 inch seam allowance. I would say more like between a 1/4 and an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance right along this top edge here. Now we're going to lift up the sides of pattern piece B. Try to line up your lining pieces as best you can. If you find that they're not even, that's fine. Just try to get them, for the most part, even. You can see, I don't know if you can see, but on this one here, the top lining piece is quite a bit shorter than the bottom. That's fine. It is a lining pocket. It's not that big of a deal if it's not perfect. Now we're going to go to the sewing machine, keeping pattern piece B out of the way, and we're going to sew along the sides and the bottom at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And if you have a situation like this, do it a 1/4 inch from the shorter edge, so that way you catch both edges, right? All the way on the sides and the bottom, 1/4 inch seam allowance. Make sure you backstitch at the beginning and the end. So now that we have the pocket complete, I'm going to add my bag tag real quick so I don't forget about it. So I like to add it about 1 inch down from this bottom edge. So what I'm going to do is just fold this B panel in half, lining up the side edges over here on the left, and then pinching right here in the middle. And I grab an air erasing marker, some sort of marking tool that will not stay there forever, and just mark a little tick right there. I'm going to take my bag tag and add a piece of double-sided tape to the back of it. And then I like to use my little ruler here, line it up with that midpoint mark, and that way I know it's 1 inch down. And then I'll just center my bag tag on my ruler. There we go. And now I'm just going to go top stitch along all 4 edges of my bag tag at an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. As I'm doing this, I don't want to sew through the pocket, so I'm going to lift this pocket out of the way, just like that, keeping it out of the way, and then top stitching. All right, once this bottom panel is done, just set it to the side for a moment. So now take your pattern piece D, and on the back side, I marked a line that is 2.5 inches up from this bottom edge. We're doing that because we want to fold this edge up by 1 1/4 inch, and this is the easiest way to do it. So looking at the wrong side, I'm looking at the bottom edge. I'm just going to fold my material wrong sides up, so that the bottom edge meets that marked line. And then I'm just going to press it with my iron. And I'm just going along the entire edge here. There we go. So this is the back, and when we flip it to the front, you should just have a folded edge on the bottom and a raw edge on the top. Next, looking at the folded edge on the bottom, mark a line that is 3/4 of an inch up from that bottom folded edge. So again, I'm using a chalk marker. It's going to be a little tricky to get off of the canvas, but it will wipe off. But I want to have that mark there. It needs to be with some sort of fabric marking tool though, because this is the right side. Okay, now this part is a little tricky. You're going to take your bottom piece B, lay it right side up, and then take your accent piece here and lay it right side up. And we want to grab your cutting mat, a ruler, something. We want the total height of this to be 11 inches tall. So you're going to move this up or down to make sure it becomes 11 inches tall. So when I'm measuring this, I start and measure on the sides first and try to clip them. But I find that the bottom folded edge of this little lip here just kind of like kisses the top fold of the zipper. So it doesn't even go all the way down to the top stitching. It just kind of kisses it, just barely covers the zipper tape. So that's kind of how I'm lining mine up, because it is a little tricky. I know in the picture it makes it look like this overextends quite a bit over the zipper, but when I'm doing it myself, I don't find that to be true. So now we're going to go to the sewing machine and we're going to top stitch right over this marked line. And if you want to just double check, just kind of like put your finger where the line is, and it should definitely be stitching on the zipper tape. So we're just going to top stitch right over this marked line. All right, so just double check, look under here, make sure it caught the zipper tape. It all looks good. There we go. So now we have our front panel all ready to go. All right, so now keeping your front panel you just built, also grab your back panel, which is pattern piece A, and then grab your bottom panel, and then grab the 3 foam pieces. We're going to attach the foam to all 3 of these pieces. So starting with the front panel, I'm just going to lay my foam and then take my front panel, lay it right side up, and just match it up corner to corner. And you can use a basting spray here if you'd like, which is just like a temporary spray adhesive. I find clips are fine, but I'm going to match up all the corners first, and then I'll clip along the edges. So once you have the front panel done, repeat that with the bottom panel and the back panel. Okay, I have all 3 pieces clipped together. Now we're going to go to the sewing machine and we're going to baste along all 4 corners of all 3 pieces at a 1/4 inch seam allowance, not an 1/8 of an inch. Okay, do a 1/4 inch seam allowance baste, and I'm going to use a 5mm stitch length because you don't want this material to shift around too much. So I find the bigger the stitch length, the more stable the material is. So once you have the material basted to the foam, what you want to do is carefully take your scissors and just cut the foam as close as you can get it to the stitching without cutting the material. So I find what I like to do is like hold it from this side and I pull the material back, just the fabric, and then I just take a small pair of scissors and just cut down the foam. So you can see on all these, the foam doesn't quite extend to the edges, and that's because I cut it down. That's just gonna make it easier to sew later, especially if you have a domestic machine and layers are challenging. So let's put the front and bottom panels to the side. You can keep the back panel out. Now grab your 2 small cuts of webbing. These are each 3 inches long, and then grab your 2 rectangle rings. Once again, if you have a 1-inch webbing, you have 1-inch rectangle rings. I have 1.5-inch webbing, so I have 1.5-inch rectangle rings. It's simple. So take your webbing and just wrap it around one of the long straight edges of the ring, and then match up those short raw edges and clip together. Do this for the other rectangle ring as well. Now let's just go baste along these short clipped edges at a 1/4-inch seam allowance just to hold this together. Once you have those basted, grab your back panel and lay it so that the top is on the top, bottom's on the bottom. And you're gonna measure 3 inches from the left side, just along that bottom edge. Grab one of your little tabs here and line it up at the 3-inch mark so that the raw edge is along the bottom raw edge of the material, and clip this in place. Repeat that on the other side, 3 inches this time from the right. And now let's go sew these down at a 1/4-inch seam allowance. All right, now that this is all prepped, you can set it to the side. Okay, now let's work on the straps. To build the straps, take 2 of these long rectangles and let's look at the back side of them. And you just need something small and round because we want these to be rounded. If you don't want them to be rounded, they don't have to be. You could leave them as rectangles, honestly. It's up to you. You could grab something like a penny. I have a small spool here. And all I'm going to do is I'm just going to line this up so that the right side of my spool lines up with the right side of my material. And I'm just going to make sure it's centered on there. And I'm just going to trace the rounded bit just like that. I'm going to do the same thing on the left side over here. And I'm going to do this for both corners of 2 of the straps. The other 2 we don't need to worry about just yet. Okay, so I have 4 corners rounded. I'm just going to grab my scissors. And I'm going to cut along those rounded marks. And don't be too worried if they're not exactly precise. I'm going to show you what I do to make sure they're okay. Okay, so now take one of your straps that does not have the rounded corners and lay it wrong side up, right side down. And then grab one of your straps that does have the rounded corners. And let's look at the back side of that rounded corner strap. Grab some double-sided tape or glue. I like double-sided tape because I don't have the patience to wait for the glue to dry. I'm just going to run it right along the center of my strap. And then I'll remove the paper. And now I'm going to take the rounded strap and lay it right side up, wrong side down, so it's wrong sides together with the one that's not rounded. I'm just going to match up the short edges. And then just make sure the long edges are aligned. And using that double-sided tape, it's just going to hold it together. There we go. So now I have one strap here where the top part here has the rounded edges, and if I flip it over, then I have the rectangle edges on the bottom. So I'm just going to leave it so that the rounded edges is up. And I'm going to repeat that with the other set of non-rounded and rounded edge straps. All right, and now with both of my straps facing so that the rounded side is right side up, I'm going to take these to the sewing machine and top stitch around this strap. And I'm top stitching around the rounded edge and the sides. I'm not worried about these corners down here because after I'm done top stitching, I can actually just trim down the rectangle part so that it matches perfectly with the rounded part. That's why I said don't worry so much about these being exactly right, because I was kind of worried about that. Like, well, what if I don't make the same exact rounding and it's not even? So you don't have to worry about that. So once you have them top stitched, now I'm just going to take the scissors and I'm going to cut off the rectangle side and clean up the rounding. That way I have a nice perfectly rounded corner. I'm going to do this for all 4 ends of my strap. And now if you have edge coating, which is so fun, edge coating is pretty much just painting the raw edges. I mean, it's coating the edges of the raw material because we do have this raw material here. You can layer on paint, and it can be a paint that matches your cork or whatever kind of vinyl you're using, or it can be a colorful one. Like you could do like a bright blue. Neon colors are really fun with stuff like this. So if you want to do that, I'm going to have a link down below of where I like to buy it. It's from Mojo Sew. There's a lot of tutorials out there going over how to layer it. Like I said, I'm not an expert in it yet. I hope in a future video we'll have more understanding of how to use it. But there are a lot of other people out there with videos. I'll try to link some down below as well to help you with that. However, I'm going to move on without this. Now, we're going to attach both of these straps to the bag. How I do it to the front is going to be different than how I do it to the back. And I'm going to explain why, but the big thing is because of the size of our strap. If you're using a 1-inch wide webbing, then you're fine. Just stay with the pattern. If you're using 1.5-inch wide, we have to change it a little bit on the back side, and we'll talk about that. So let's go through the front first. So we're going to start on the left side of the strap. You're going to measure in 4 inches from the left side, and that's where the strap's going to go vertically. And then the very tip of the strap is going to come down 2 3/4 of an inch. It brings it just below the top stitching, almost on top of the zipper teeth, but not on top of them. I mean, it's like right there. So I'm going to use clips to hold it at the top. Then I'm also going to grab some tape to hold it at the bottom. And before I do the tape, we want to measure a couple lines. Again, this is only for the front panel. We're going to measure 1/2 inch up from this bottom edge here and make a horizontal line. And then I'm going to measure 1 3/4 inch up from this bottom edge and make another horizontal line, just like that. Now, I suggest grabbing a piece of tape and then just putting it right along the bottom just to hold it in place. Remeasure, make sure nothing shifted on you. It's still 4 inches. Just want to keep it as straight as possible. There we go. So again, only for the front. If you want to do this, you can. But we're going to stitch along both of these horizontal lines. Now you can just stitch along the horizontal lines, which is what we're going to do on the back, just the horizontal lines. However, if you want it to have a more polished look, we can make a little rectangle here, which is what I'm going to do on the front panel only. I'm going to stitch over these horizontal lines, going over the top stitching I already have on the sides, back to the horizontal one, and down. Just making a little rectangle, that's it. Okay, so we have that side done. Now we're going to repeat that on the other side. We're going to measure 4 inches in on the right and 2 3/4 inch down from the top is where the other strap is going to come. Make sure as you do this, you don't twist it or anything. You keep it nice and straight and just rotate it down like this. And then once again on the end of this strap, measure a 1/2 inch from the bottom edge, and then also measure up 1 3/4 inch from the bottom, draw another horizontal line, add a little bit of tape here to hold it in place. And I'm just like I did on the other side, I'm just going to make a little rectangle following the top stitching I already did on the sides and then over these horizontal lines. And there we go. Now we have the handle attached to the front. Now, the front is not a big deal because there's not a whole lot going on with the front. We have the pocket already, that's it. The back though, we have to be more precise about this. So let's move on to the back. Grab your back panel and your remaining strap. And if you are using a 1 inch wide webbing, just repeat what we did before, 4 inches in, 2 3/4 inch down, just repeat all that. However, if you're using a 1.5 inch webbing, then we need to do this a little differently. We're still going to place it in the same spot, but where we draw our horizontal lines has to be different. And the reason for that is because this is a backpack. And once we have the backpack set up, a strap is going to go through the bottom here. Then it's actually going to go through those horizontal openings under this strap here and then out the other side. So let me show you on the one I've already done. You see it goes through the buckles down here and then it goes through the opening right here, these straps. This is not set up in the pattern to accommodate a 1.5 inch strap, which means we have to make some modifications to make it work. So that's what we're gonna do. Pretty much what we want is we want at least 1 5/8 to 1 3/4 inch opening for that strap. 1.5 inch opening here is not gonna be big enough because it needs more space than that. So before we even attach this, I'm gonna take my strap and lay it right side up. And I'm gonna grab my ruler. And for this back strap only, again, only if you're using the 1.5 inch wide webbing, I'm going to measure 1/4 inch up from the bottom edge. So on the front, we did 1/2 inch. On the back here, I'm going to do 1/4 inch. And then I'm going to measure up 2 inches from the bottom edge. And that should leave me with 1 3/4 inch opening for my strap. So I'm going to do that on one side. I'm going to repeat this on the other side. 1/4 inch from the bottom and then 2 inches from the bottom. And hopefully that will be enough. I'll give you one more tip in just a moment. So I've measured 4 inches from the right side over, and the bottom edge of my strap is 2 3/4 inch from the top. I'm gonna add just a tiny bit of tape down here, once again, just to hold in place, or I can even put it right over the center, because we're not sewing a rectangle this time. So this time we are only going to sew over the horizontal lines, and I'm going to sew over it a couple times. I'm going to start on one side, go all the way across, go all the way back. I'm going to do this for both of these. We want these to be as strong as possible because this is where we're going to be putting a lot of pressure on our backpack. All right, so once you have those stitched, grab your webbing and just double check, make sure it'll fit. So just slide your webbing in from one side under the strap, and it should go through. As long as it goes through, you're good. Now here's the thing. This could be difficult later. We still have to sew the top of this bag with the lining. We're gonna have to top stitch. We don't have much space here. So on my first bag, what I did was I actually only sewed the bottom edge, and I did not sew the top edge at all until I was top stitching the bag. So I'm gonna put a little pop-up over here to let you know if you should wait and only sew the bottom edge and then sew the top edge in the end when we top stitch, or if this will be okay. You can just click ahead if you'd like to see me struggle with this. But that is another option, is just for the back panel only, top stitch the bottom edge here, but don't do anything on the top yet. Just leave this, just only do the bottom bits for the strap. And then in the end, when we turn the bag out and we have to top stitch right around the top of the bag, just include the straps in that top stitching. That's another option. But I'm gonna see how this works. I mean, let's see, we have about 3/4 of an inch up here, so with a 3/8 inch seam allowance, I mean, it's gonna be very tricky. Very, very tricky, but I'm gonna try. So I measured over my 4 inches, let me just double check, and I went 2 3/4 of an inch down. Once again, I'm just gonna go over these 2 horizontal lines, just back and forth, not making a rectangle. We need this to stay open. All right, there we go. Now I have them both attached. So now grab your 3 exterior panels, your bottom, your front, and your back, and we're gonna mark the midpoints on the long edges and the short edges of the base, and then also on the top and bottom long edges of the front and back panel. All right, let's start with the front panel. Take your front panel and lay it right side up. Grab your base panel. You're gonna lay your base panel right side down, long edge against the long edge of the base, and then just match up those midpoint marks. So the base panel does not come all the way to the sides. It's not supposed to. This is creating a boxed bottom without having to like cut out the boxing bits. So just clip along this entire bottom edge. Then grab a ruler and a marking pen, and you're going to measure in 3/8 of an inch from the short side. So over here on the left, I'm going to measure 3/8 of an inch over to the right, and I'm going to mark a line that's 3/8 of an inch over there. I'm going to do the same thing on the other side, 3/8 of an inch from the right side, and mark a line. And I'm going to sew from one marking to the other at a 3/8 inch seam allowance, making sure I backstitch at the beginning and the end at each of these marks. Once you have that sewn, you're going to take your scissors and going from the bottom raw edge here, right at that 3/8 inch mark, you're going to just trim up to the corner of the stitching, but don't cut any of the stitching. So I'm pretty much just trimming right over my mark, except I'm not cutting any threads here. And now we're going to fold the base down so that the seam goes behind the base, which I know is pretty bulky, but that's what you want. You want the seam to go behind this base panel. And then we're going to go to the sewing machine and we're going to top stitch along the base, but again, not all the way from short edge to short edge. So if you want to grab your ruler, go ahead and do that. And an erasing marking tool of some sort, mark 3/8 of an inch from each of these short raw edges. And then just remember, seam goes behind the base panel and you're top stitching on the base panel from one mark to the other at an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. All right, so that's how we attach the base to one panel. We're going to repeat that with the other one. So take your back panel and let's move those rectangle rings up. Lay your back panel right side up. Take your unit with the base and lay it right side down. Let's match up the midpoint marks on the bottom of the base with the bottom of the back panel. And once again, on the bottom of the base panel, measure in 3/8 of an inch from each short edge and mark a line. And now we're going to sew from one mark to the other at a 3/8 inch seam allowance, making sure you backstitch at the beginning and the end. Okay, so once you have those sewn, grab your scissors. Once again, on the bottom edge here, you're going to mark straight up along those 3/8 of an inch marks till you get to the corner of the stitching without actually cutting any of those threads. And then we're going to flip this over and let's mark 3/8 of an inch from each short edge on the right side of the base panel, this bottom cork piece here, and then make sure you rotate the seam so that it's behind the base panel. So your webbing is going to stay straight. We're not bending the webbing in any way. So just finger press that as best you can. And then let's go to the sewing machine and we're going to top stitch from one mark to the other at an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance right along this base panel. Okay, the base is now attached. So take both of your main panels and we're gonna fold them right sides together. And now we're just gonna work on the sides. So line up the bottom edge and the top edge. So I'm just going from corner to corner. I always start at corners. So one corner, clip there, clip the top corner, and then just clip right along this short side over here. And let's repeat that with the other side. So once you have both sides clipped, we're going to sew along each of these sides at a 3/8 inch seam allowance, making sure you backstitch at the top and the bottom. All right, once you have these sewn, on the sides over here, you just kind of finger press open the seam just a bit. This will help us with boxing the bottoms. To box these bottoms, you're going to pinch this so that the seam on the side matches up with that midpoint you marked on the bottom panel. And it is easiest if you can press open the seam, at least where it's going to be sewn together. And just pull these right sides together, matching them up, and add some clips here. And this is also why we clipped along those bottom edges. Remember we made that cut into the seam up to the threads? This is why, because this is how it spreads over here so that we can get these lined up and straight. There we go. So do this for both bottom corners. Now we're going to sew along both of these edges, first at a 3/8 inch seam allowance and then again at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And what that second row of stitches does is it prevents the material from pulling. So sometimes you'll notice if you make a bag and the material's thick and you flip it right side out, you can see the stitching. It's like the material's pulling away and you can see the thread. Doing that second row of stitching will prevent that from happening. Alrighty, now the exterior is done. You can leave it wrong side out while we work on the lining. So now grab pattern piece G and let's fold this right sides together. So this is my right side over here, right sides together, short sides together. And let's just line up all the edges and the corners. And I'm just gonna finger press it for now. I don't need to use the iron just yet. And then on this bottom straight edge over here, just mark a 3-inch opening. And now we're gonna go to the sewing machine and we're gonna sew along the sides and the bottom, except for this opening, at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So I'll start over here on the top right, go down the side, pivot, go to the first mark, make sure I backstitch here and also at the beginning, jump over this opening, backstitch at the next mark, and then continue on to the left side, making sure I backstitch at the end. All at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Once you have that all sewn together, let's trim all 4 corners. So just trim off the very corners here. Doesn't have to be anything specific or anything perfect, just reducing the bulk at the corner. Now let's take this and flip it right side out through that hole. This is where that turning tool comes in handy. You can just kind of gently poke it in here and poke out those corners real nicely. All right, so we have a bit of a mess here. So we're gonna start with this one side at a time. I'm gonna go to one of the sides over here where there's a seam, and I'm gently just rolling it with my fingers. You could also put your hand inside through that hole or use the turning tool, but I'm just trying to straighten out one edge at a time. So once I have one finger pressed and straightened, then I'll grab my iron and just press along that edge. There we go. Then I'm gonna go to the other side and do the same thing. I find rolling it is easiest, but you might find another method to be easier. So I'm still just doing the sides. I haven't done the bottom yet. Once I have the sides done, now I'm just gonna press it along the top edge and the body. The bottom edge is the last that I worry about. Okay, so for the bottom edge, we wanna carefully kind of insert our fingers into that little hole and let those raw edges roll in on themselves. And then just get it as straight as you can. Doesn't have to be perfect. Remember, this is a lining pocket. This is the bottom of a lining pocket. We really just want to get those raw edges tucked in. That's it. So once you're happy with it, we're going to take this back to the sewing machine, and the top edge is the folded edge. So the open is on the bottom here. That's the bottom edge. The top edges are folded edge, and let's just top stitch right along that top edge at an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Now grab one of your main lining panels and lay it right side up, and let's find the midpoint along the bottom edge here. You can mark the midpoint on the top as well if you'd like. We're going to have to mark that at some point anyways. And then grab your slip pocket, and if you want, you can use a pin for this, or you can use a marking tool like I'm going to use. Don't use scissors though. I'm going to use an air erasing marker, and I'm just marking the midpoint along the bottom edge of my pocket. So the bottom edge is the one that still has the opening. And now I'm going to grab a ruler, and I'm going to measure 1 inch up from the bottom edge of my main lining panel. Then I'm going to take my slip pocket, and using the midpoint marks, I'm going to line it up with my ruler. So my slip pocket is now 1 inch up and centered on my lining panel. I like to use tape to hold this in place. And now I'm going to go to the sewing machine and I'm going to top stitch along the sides and the bottom at an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance, making sure I back stitch really well up here at the beginning and the end along the top opening. And there we go. Now we have our slip pocket attached to our lining. You can set this to the side now. So now let's work on the main zipper. Grab your 4 recessed zipper panels and your remaining zipper, and let's prep these panels first. So on the back side of each one of these panels, use a marking tool and measure 1 inch in from each short edge. Once you have that marked, once again keeping it wrong side up, you're going to fold in the short edges wrong sides together and back to meet that 1 inch mark, and then just press it. So we're just folding back the short edges by 1/2 of an inch. So do this for all 4 of your panels. Once you have those prepped, grab your remaining zipper and you'll see you have a closed end. So when I open the zipper, this side over here opens up, and when I close the zipper, this side over here stays closed. So on the open end, you want to open it up all the way, just like that. And now I'm going to measure down 3/4 of an inch from each of the open edges. I'm just going to mark a little tick right on the edge of my zipper tape, just 3/4 of an inch down. And then at that 3/4 of an inch mark, I'm going to fold the zipper tape wrong sides together. And as I pinch it like that, you'll see the zipper tape curves up and out. That's what I want it to do, because as I pinch it, I'm just going to fold that pinch up to meet the teeth. And then I have my zipper kind of hanging over the edge like that. And I'm doing the same thing on the other side. So just pinching it at that mark and then letting the zipper teeth coil away, and then just folding that mark over so that it's folded on top. There we go. Now we're going to go to the sewing machine and let's just stitch right along the edges just to hold this in place like this at about an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. And we are going over the zipper teeth. Again, these are plastic. You should be fine. Okay, so now you see whenever you try to close your zipper all the way, it stops because of those. There we go. So now grab one of your recessed zipper panels with the folded over edges and lay it right side up. And then take your zipper and lay your zipper right side down. And we're going to match up the top edge of the zipper that's open with the folded edge. Now I like to tuck it just under the folded edge. So I have the folded edge here, and then I have the zipper teeth just below where the fold is. So they can come right up to it if you'd like, but then they might be shown in the end. So I like to have it just below it. And if it's easier, you can actually unzip this. Just don't lose your zipper, but you have a good amount of room over there. And now let's just clip the zipper right side together with the panel along the edge. And now to make it easier for me, I'm going to baste this on first. So I'm just going to go baste this on at an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Now that that's basted on, again with the zipper wrong side up, I'm going to grab another panel and I'm going to lay it right side down on the back side of the zipper. And I'm just going to line it up with the other panel, clipping it along that basted edge of our zipper tape. And now we're going to sew along this top clipped edge at a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Make sure you backstitch at the beginning and the end. All right, now you're going to want to press these panels away from the zipper, both of them away from the zipper. So you're going to press them wrong sides together, which gets a little tricky. But don't worry too much about how the raw edge looks, because that's going to be hidden for the most part. But let's just pull these panels wrong sides together. I'm going to once again clip at the corners first. And I'm going to gently go along the edge, lining up the raw edges with one another and clipping together. And if you want to get your iron out and press this, you can definitely do that to get it nice and flat. But I find using my fingers is good enough. Now what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to top stitch along all 4 edges of this panel at an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance, so right by the zipper and also the short edges and also the long edge. I find it just makes it a little bit easier later to have this already top stitched, but again, all at an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. All right, we have one panel on. Now we're just going to repeat that with the other side. So once again, grab one of your zipper panels and lay it right side up, keeping the folds folded back. Take your zipper, and again, I'm going to open it mostly. And we're going to line it up just like we did previously. So it's just, the teeth are almost meeting the folded edge, but not quite. They're just below it. And that just allows me to kind of hide those teeth when I sew this all together. There are other ways to do these types of zipper panels where we don't have this folded edge here and instead we sew it and then pull it out. This is just another technique, a different way of doing it. But I do like to keep the corners of those zipper teeth hidden as much as possible. I'm going to clip this together. And before I baste this, I'm actually going to close my zipper some. And I just want to make sure it's all lined up. So I'm just checking to make sure the folded edges are lined up on the side we already sewed and the side I'm preparing to sew, and that looks good. So now let's go to the sewing machine and just baste this opposite end here down at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Now let's flip this over so we're looking at the back of the zipper tape. Grab your remaining panel and you're going to lay that right side down to the back of the zipper tape and just line it up with the panel that's already basted on and clip along that basted edge. And now let's go sew along this straight clipped edge at a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Make sure you backstitch at the beginning and the end. Alright, and just like before, we're going to press these two panels wrong sides together. So if you find it's easier to use an iron, then go ahead and do that. I have a tendency to burn myself with these little panels like this. So I'm just going to use my fingers and clips to connect the corners and then the bottom straight edge. Okay, once you have this flattened out and all ready to go, I'm going to once again just top stitch along all 4 edges of my panels at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. All right, now that we have the panels attached, if you have a metal zipper end, go ahead and install that. But if you're using the fabric version, then I will walk you through that now. So grab your end tab and fold it wrong sides together, short sides together, and then just press along that edge. And then you can open it back up. Press each of the short edges wrong sides together to meet that middle mark you just made. And then I'm just going to finger press this so that I have the kind of longer raw edges coming together, just so I can find the middle. And then what we want to do is we want to take the long raw edge here on the side and press that in to meet that middle line. And just press along the edge with your iron. And then we're going to do the same thing on the other side, just taking all these bits and folding them in to meet the middle and press. There we go. So once you have no raw edges on the top, the sides, anything like that, then you fold this whole thing back in half and you have a nice little tiny nub here. So now take your zipper in and you're going to wrap the material back like this. So you have a nice little point where the coils are. And you can just slide this right in the center. I kind of like to tuck it in to the material a little bit. I find it makes it a little bit easier to hold it all together. So just kind of tuck it into one side, sliding the zipper in there. Try to straighten it out as best you can. If it's not perfect, that's fine. And then clip the tab over the end. So this is how it should look. And now we're just going to go to the sewing machine and top stitch along all 4 edges of this little zipper tab. Okay, so our recessed zipper is ready to be attached. So grab your lining panel that has the slip pocket already attached to it and lay it right side up. So now grab your zipper panel and we want to find the midpoint along the zipper panel. So just fold the zipper panel in half, short edges together, and I'm just going to mark a little tick mark right on the edge on the right side of my zipper panel. And then using the midpoint mark on the zipper panel and the midpoint mark on the top edge of your lining, center your zipper panel so that the zipper is right side up and that it is 1.5 inches down from the top edge. Now we're going to go to the sewing machine and we're going to top stitch at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance right over the long edge of our zipper panel. Make sure you back stitch at the beginning and the end. Once you have that top stitch down, now take your zipper panel and flip it up so it's wrong side up. And you're folding that seam right underneath the zipper panel. Try to keep your lining as straight as possible. And now from the bottom edge here of our zipper panel on the back side, we're going to top stitch at 1/4 inch seam allowance. And that's going to encase that little raw edge that we just put down so that we don't see it in the end. Once again, make sure you back stitch at the beginning and the end. So now you see when you pull this down, you look from the top, you don't see any raw edges. So we're going to repeat that with the other lining. So grab your remaining lining panel and lay it right side up. And then we're going to grab our zipper. You might find it easier to open your zipper more. And you're going to lay your zipper right side up on the right side of your lining panel. And then once again, you're going to match up the midpoint mark on your zipper panel with the midpoint mark on the top edge of the lining. And make sure it is level and 1.5 inches down from the top edge. And now let's top stitch along the top edge here of the zipper panel at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance, back stitching at the beginning and the end. So once you have this top stitch down, now let's just fold up the panel. So we're looking at the back side of it, and we're going to take it back to the sewing machine, and now we're going to top stitch at 1/4 inch seam allowance from this folded bottom edge here along the zipper panel. Make sure you back stitch at the beginning and the end. All right, I know it's kind of a mess whenever you get it done. It's like, how do I put it back together? Just try to get the zipper to go together. There we go. So you see now you have the lining and you'll have a zipper. Opens up, inside of lining. Everything should be good. Just double check everything is right sides, where it's supposed to be right sides. We should be good. So now we're gonna build the lining just like we build the exterior. So grab your base piece here and let's mark the midpoint along all 4 edges. So both long edges, both short edges, just mark those midpoints. Grab one of your lining panels, it doesn't matter which one, and lay it right side up. Make sure you have the midpoint marked on the bottom. And then grab your base lining panel and lay that right side down, matching up the midpoint mark on the long edge. And let's just clip these together. Remember, these are right sides together. And on the side here that does not have the slip pocket, this is the side I'm gonna leave the opening for turning later. So let's mark some spots here. First, I'm gonna mark 1/2 inch in from each short edge. So 1/2 inch in from the left and the right, because I will be using a 1/2 inch seam allowance down here. And then on this side here, again, this is the lining panel that does not have the slip pocket, I'm gonna leave a 6-inch opening. So I'm just gonna set my ruler in here and just mark 6-inch opening in the center. So now I'm gonna go to the sewing machine and starting at this first marked line, I'm gonna sew at a 1/2 inch seam allowance from the mark over here on the right to that mark for the opening. And then I'm gonna jump over the opening and continue on at a 1/2 inch seam allowance until I get to that final mark. So I'm not sewing all the way to the edges and I'm not sewing between the opening, and I'm sewing at a 1/2 inch each time. Every time I get to a mark, I will backstitch. Once you have that sewn, grab your scissors, and once again, we're just gonna clip from the bottom edge up to the corner of the stitching over here on the 1/2 inch marks on the left and the right, just like we did on the front. So now we don't have to do any top stitching or anything like that with this. So now we're going to attach the base to the other side, which I know is a little complicated. So grab your remaining lining panel that has the slip pocket, lay that right side up, and then carefully bring this over. Make sure you didn't twist your zipper or anything. And once again, we're going to line up the middle of the base with the middle of the remaining lining panel and clip along this bottom edge. And then for this side, we just need to mark the 1/2 inch from the short edges. So 1/2 inch from the left and 1/2 inch from the right. All right, now let's sew at a 1/2 inch seam allowance from one mark to the other. Make sure you backstitch at the beginning and the end. All right, once that's sewn, just like before, we're going to cut from the bottom edge up to meet the stitching without cutting the stitching. There we go. So now let's work on the sides. Take both your lining panels, lay them right sides together, and let's match up the sides corner to corner, and then just clip along these edges to keep them straight. Over here on the side where you have the extension of the zipper, just push that down. You don't want to accidentally sew over that. So for these, we're going to start at the top, sewing at a 3/8 inch seam allowance, and then as we get past the zipper, increase the seam allowance to a 1/2 inch seam allowance. So by the time you end at the bottom, you are at a 1/2 inch seam allowance. So it's important that at the top it's at a 3/8 inch seam allowance, but at the bottom it's a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Make sure you backstitch at both the top and the bottom. Okay, now if you'd like, you can trim down the bottom part of the seam allowance a little bit. Just a little bit. It'll help with boxing the corners if we trim this down. Now let's box these corners by once again pulling on the edges and pulling the seam on the side of the bag to meet the midpoint mark on the base of the bag, and then just clip along the edge. Do this for both sides. And now let's sew along both of these clipped edges at a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Make sure you backstitch at the beginning and the end. Once you have the boxed bottoms done, you can trim down the seam allowance in half if you'd like. Okay, so now we have our exterior and we have our lining. Let's flip our lining so the lining is right side out, wrong side in. So everything's kind of the opposite of how we would normally want it to be. And I'm going to insert my lining so that the slip pocket side goes against the back of the bag. So the bag that doesn't have the zipper on it, I'm gonna insert my lining in there. My lining and exterior are right sides together, slip pocket against the back. I'm just gonna tuck it in there. Now pull up the top edge of your lining. Spread open the seam on both the lining side and the exterior side. So finger press those open, and then line up the material so that they're right sides together and matched up at the seam. I'm using a good amount of clips for this, so just clip those together. Repeat that on the other side where the seam is, making sure you tuck the zipper down. If you have a zipper tail, tuck it down. And I'm just focused on these seams right now. All right, now I'm going to take my handles and tuck those inside so they're out of the way. And now I'm going to clip together the midpoint marks on the top edges of the lining and the exterior. And then I'm going to clip along the top edge of the bag. Just holding it all together. And remember, I had to finagle my handles a little bit, so the stitching for my handles is a little bit higher up than I want it to be. But we'll see if that works out. We'll see. I think we'll be okay on this part. It's the top stitching that I'm worried about. Once you have the top edge all clipped and lined up, we're going to take this to the sewing machine and we're going to sew along the entire top edge at a 3/8 inch seam allowance. You might find this easiest to do with a zipper foot. Just go slow and be careful over these thicker seams on the side. Alright, I know it's a little tricky because you have a lot of things fighting you, and if you have the straps placed where I have mine placed, you had to really be careful about not sewing over them. But I think we did okay, so I'm going to turn this whole bag out now through that opening in the lining very gently. And this can be really easy or more challenging depending on how thick your material is. Alright, so I'm just going to reach in through the hole and poke out the corners on my exterior, just like that. And then I'm going to tuck in the lining all the way down. Now what we want to do is we want to fold down this top seam. Just make sure you fold it all the way down and then grab clips and just clip along this top edge. It's a little bulky because of the foam, but that's okay. Just do your best to go around, rolling it down and clipping along the top edge. It is bulkiest at these seams over here, so if you can get in there and flatten out the seams at all, that could help. That's why we press them open. But just do your best. Luckily, while foam is poofy, it's not very dense. It's not like vinyl that's thick and also very dense. So you can actually have a pretty thick piece of material with foam in it and still be able to sew through it without any problems, simply because the needle can go through it easily. Okay, so this back panel here is where I'm concerned. So I think I'll be able to top stitch over here. I'm just gonna have to make sure I use a zipper foot because you can see I don't have a whole lot of space from the top edge to where the strap is sewn on. But with a zipper foot, I should be okay. So if you chose to only sew down the bottom edges of the strap and you haven't sewn down the top part of the strap now, what you're going to do is just straighten out your strap and then clip it to the top edge of the bag. And when you top stitch around the top edge of the bag, just top stitch right over the strap. But if you do that, make sure you go over it a couple times. So stop, so go over it once, go backwards, go over it again. You want to really reinforce the strap. I am going to try to top stitch next to it. You can see it is a very tight fit, but I think it'll be okay. So now I'm going to take this to the sewing machine and I'm going to top stitch around the top of the bag at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. For me, I'm going to remove the bed off my sewing machine so I only have the arm and the needle, and I can kind of wrap this around the arm as I sew. Alright, that was actually not too bad. The top stitching was pretty decent, actually. I thought I was going to really struggle back here, but it was okay. So I would say as long as you're comfortable top stitching bags like this, you'll be fine. I think it looks great. Alright, so now we just need to close up the hole on the inside of this bag. So I'm just going to pull this out, and then I'm going to tuck in the sides. And I just add some clips to close it in. The goal here is that there are no raw edges peeking out of this hole. That's it. I don't measure how much I'm folding it in. I'm not making sure each side is folded in the same amount. I'm just making sure there's no raw threads, raw edges hanging out of this opening over here. So now I'm going to go to the sewing machine and just top stitch along this opening at an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. All right, once that's top stitched, just tuck it into the bag. How cute. It's so little, but so cute. I just love it. Okay, so now let's work on this little backpack strap, which is a really cool thing. First things first, take your webbing, grab a lighter, and do your best to melt down the edges of your webbing, because it likes to fray. You can also use fray check here if you'd like, but melting works well. Now grab your 2 remaining sliders. Let's take one of them. One slider, one end of your strap, insert it from the bottom of the slider up and over that middle bar, and then I'm gonna fold it over, how much? About 1 inch. I'm folding over just a tab about 1 inch, and then I'm just gonna wrap it around that bar, bringing it over like this, and tucking it under. So you can see I have the raw edge trapped inside there. I don't have it right here, I have it folded over. So now I'm gonna go to the sewing machine and I'm just gonna sew a little rectangle 1/8 of an inch from the bottom fold and from the sides, and then as close as I can get to this metal bar, just top stitching around all 4 edges. And if you prefer, instead of sewing, you could instead use rivets. So keeping the folded edge facing down and straightening out my webbing, which is the hardest part because it easily gets tangled. So straightening it out like that, and then going in from the top down to the bottom, just like that. I'm gonna bring my webbing together. So you can see I have my webbing together and it's folded over edge to the other side of the webbing. I'm going to push the raw edge up through the bottom of the swivel and then over the middle bar and then out the side and then pull it tight. So now when you do this and you pull it taut, let's get that slider all the way down, and you lift it up, you should see the right side of your slider. Just like that. This is where it gets a little tricky because I was going through the pattern a lot trying to get that to work out. But once you have that, so that when you pull it taut and you lift it up, you have the right side of the slider. Again, keep your webbing straight and then insert it into the left side of the strap here, across, and then over to the right side of the strap and across. And then pull it nice and taut. So this is what it should look like. We have the left side done. We have this and up and over. Now let's do the right side. So again, keeping it straight, we're gonna pull this down and then we're gonna have it go up from the bottom of the swivel over the middle bar, out the other end. Okay. Make sure everything is straight, and when you pull this up, the slider should be right side up. And then we're gonna bring the raw edge down from the bottom of the bag up towards the top like that, okay? So not through the top to the bottom. We're gonna go through the bottom of the bag up towards the top of the bag, keeping everything straight, and then pull a bunch of slack over that middle bar. So you see how I have like a loop here? Because now what I want to do is I want to take this raw edge, again, keeping everything straight, and I'm going to slide it underneath the webbing, between the webbing and the middle bar, so that it goes up and over that middle bar inside that loop. See that? And then once again, fold over the raw edge about 1 inch, and then bring it together so you can tighten off the top. So I know this is kind of complicated, and I apologize. Hopefully I'm showing it better than I'm saying it. But we're essentially just doing what we did over here backwards. So now you should have a folded over edge. The raw edge is folded over inside of there, just like this. Grab some clips. Use rivets here if you'd prefer, or I'm just going to go to the sewing machine and just making a rectangle as close as I can get to the bar. If you can't get that close, then that's fine. But I just want to stitch this down as much as possible. All right, and there we go. I know, the strap is, I feel like, the most complicated part of the bag, just because it's a really unique strap, which I think is cool. But here we go. Here's the back with the backpack strap, which is so cute. Such a cute little accent. And then you can take this zipper over here and tuck it in if you don't like it sticking out like that. And then here's the front with that front little hidden pocket. How cute is this bag? I hope you guys like making this. This is a fun one. Alrighty guys, what did you think? What did you think? Isn't this strap detail really cool? Did you add rivets? Because I do love the look of rivets here. I know we don't have a whole lot of space because we're using the bigger, the bigger strap. And you could always have extended these straps a little bit longer here. These handle straps, you could have made them a little bit longer. You have a lot of options here to kind of play and finagle with this, but I think this is such a clever way to do a bag. So I hope you love making the Sloane as much as I do. If you make one of these, let me know. If you use the material from the kit, let me know. Let me see it. If you switch this up and use your own material, I want to see that too, because I have a lot a lot of ideas. I think this could be a very chic bag if you use like a faux leather. As long as you had a machine that could handle the thickness of that, you could definitely use some like faux leather, some Decoville light to kind of like make it less squishy, but it does make it a lot more dense, and so you gotta worry about the needle breaking and stuff. But I would really like to make this bag in a lot of different materials. I hope you're having a great day. Have a fantastic rest of your week. Get out there and make something. Bye, guys.